would send him out to do a 10-minute unaccompanied saxophone solo. This was unheard of. Free jazz, blowing, screaming on the horn. Who does that? And of course, we had the rock audience, but also people like Ornette would come to see, largely to see Jim Pepper. I mean, I think they liked the Free Spirits, but they really were coming to see Jim Pepper. Don Cherry came. Jack DeJohnette used to come. Just young kids. They were young kids. Now, you know, Jack DeJohnette just turned 70, I think. But he's, in fact, his birthday was August 7th. So he might be 71 by now. But anyway, he would come and he wore a Zorro hat and he had a black cape and he would dance to the Free Spirit. But they all came to see Jim Pepper. And he would come and play this 10-minute, 15-minute unaccompanied sax solo that was just blood-curdling, but at the same time, and bewildering to the rock audience. They were like, what is this, you know? And just when they were completely mystified, we'd come out and hit some Chuck Berry, and blow the people away, because the last thing they were expecting. The Coryell could play all that stuff, Stones, Chuck Berry, everybody, you know, all the Blue, B.B. King, you know, Oop Poopa Doop. Larry could play any style of R&B, folk music. But we would start the gigs with Jim Pepper unaccompanied solos, which were brilliant, just genius. Nobody had a more beautiful scream. You know, there are a lot of people when the kind of avant-garde came in that did the screaming horn. But if you have a really good ear, you can tell well, sometimes it's just plain ugly. It's just harsh. But some people would scream and it'd be like most beautiful music. And Pepper was like that. I would say Pharoah Sanders like that, Coltrane. They screamed, but it wasn't ugly. There was so much beauty in it. But the intensity was so strong that a lot of people couldn't see beyond or hear beyond the surface. See? But if you could hear beyond the surface, you'd hear the beauty of it. You know, I have to give credit to Jim Pepper for really opening my ears to, let's say, the freer music. And Larry Coryell, I give him credit for opening my ears to rock and folk music. When I was really young, I kind of was like maybe a bit of a jazz snob. I'm not saying the same, but maybe a little bit sort of like Wynton Marsalis attitude. I'm not saying, I mean, he's probably much smarter than I was. I'm just a kid. But in other words, I was a jazz guy. You know, if you didn't have the time, if you couldn't play time and changes, you weren't a real musician. So my feeling about the avant-garde was they were just a bunch of fakers who didn't really know what they were doing. They just go out and scream. That's not real music. And my feeling about the rock guys was a little bit like that too. Yeah, they play 3 chords and everything's in E, and they're not really great musicians. So I remember the first time I heard Jim Pepper, he was playing this beautiful jazz ballad. I mean, of the highest level. It could be like a Coltrane level, like kind of Coltrane in the 50s, how he would play, like that style. And I thought, man, this guy is one of the greatest saxophone players I've ever heard. I immediately recognized him. The next time I heard him playing, he was screaming like a banshee. He was playing into the corner. That's what he would do. I guess he could hear his sound, but he would play in the corner and his sound would come back. Just screaming. And at first I thought, wow, why is this guy who could play so beautiful playing like this? I didn't understand it. And then I said, oh, maybe I should listen a little more careful, because I knew he was great. And I started listening to the screaming, and I thought, oh man, there's all kinds of music in there. There's all kinds of beauty, all kinds of melodies and chords and harmonies in the screaming. So then I said, okay, I better listen to all music without prejudice. And then I had the same thing with Larry, because when I first heard Larry play, he was playing like, jazz, like Wes Montgomery level jazz. And I said, this guy is a great guitar player. The next time I heard him playing, he was like, bum, bum, ba, doo, dang, dang. I said, wow, the same guy who could play all of this is playing that. Maybe I should start listening to that music more seriously. And so I remember becoming a fan of Dylan, of the band, of the Stones, the Beatles, which I wasn't initially, And then I started hearing, and all those people are great musicians. In retrospect, it's kind of obvious, duh. But it took me a minute. So I give forever. I like to hope that I would have learned these lessons along the road anyway, down the line somehow, on my own or by somebody else. But I never forget both Pepper for opening my ear to the avant-garde and Coryell for opening my ear to rock, jazz, blues. Well, blues I always like, R&B, but let's say the rock stuff, folk music. Then you start listening past genres, and you get to people's essence, the core of where they're coming from. So with the Free Spirits, I think we'll be doing some rockish kind of stuff. I haven't played that way in years. And all I can say is I hope I don't mess it up too bad. But I think with these guys, they play so well that it should be pretty easy, because I'll just climb. It should be like a car that's already driving. All I got to do is get in, But one thing I got to say about the Free Spirits and all the people in that group is whenever we did a genre, whether it was a rock thing or a ballad or free music or African music, it always pushed the boundaries. It was never stock. That's the word I was looking for, never stock. Always like, whoa, just about bursting out of the box, and that was part of our personalities. I think everyone in the Free Spirits, I don't want to overstate it, but I would have to say to a certain extent was a visionary. And certainly musically on the highest level. Chris Hill's truly a genius musician, the bassist. He's also a better drummer than almost any drummer I heard, including myself. In fact, one of the things that used to really bug me about the Free Spirits when we rehearsed, or jam, I don't think we rehearsed, we just played, but we'd play in the loft, we'd work on songs, and because I didn't want to get off the drums. Because I knew if I got off the drums, Chris Hills would get on the drums. And once he got on the drums, it would be at least 40 minutes to get him off again. And that wasn't the worst of it. What was worse is that he was playing stuff that was way beyond what I could play. He was the bass player sitting on the drums and playing these beats that I couldn't believe. And Chris Hills, when I first met him, was really let's say a jazz bass player. He played acoustic bass. He played with the strength and a drive of Mingus, who I knew very well. Mingus used to come and do duets with me in my house when I was 13. He was a friend of my dad. I grew up in a building with Max Roach, Art Blakey, Abby Lincoln was married to Max Roach, Elvin, and Rahsaan Roland Kirk. Mingus lived across the park on the east side. He would come over and visit with the family and play duets with me on the piano when I was 13. But Chris Hills had that kind of strength, a level bass player. Then later he got into the R&B and the funk. Started playing electric bass, guitar, drums, pretty much everything at a very high level. And he became a real master of all forms of R&B. I mean all forms. Because they had the regional sound in those days, the Philly sound, which was kind of with strings but was funky, like the OJs and Teddy Pendergrass. You had the Motown sound. You had the Stax Volt, Otis Redding, guys like that. Memphis sound, Al Green. You had James Brown, which is his own school in itself. Chris Hills could play all of that as good as anybody ever heard, and writing new music in that style. He made a record which is very obscure and very hard to get. I have it on LP called Coming Out of the Ghetto, that I would say is a true R&B masterpiece. And Chris Hill's on the drums. When he played jazz, he was like maybe the closest drummer to Elvin I ever heard, like loose, organic like that. And when he played the funk, he sounded like that guy from Tower of Power, like Garibaldi. But this is 10 years before I heard Tower of Power, Garibaldi. Chris Hills was playing beats like that. In other words, he didn't take it from Garibaldi. I'm not saying Garibaldi took it from him, but he was playing that way before I ever heard those guys. These incredibly backed up funk beats that was so funky and what I call squinchable. You know, when you hear something, it's just like, woo, man. So that's Chris Hills. But he's a genius and a beautiful cat. I love him. You know, I love them all like brothers. We were young, we were crazy, so naturally, you know, we were super imperfect beings. I come from Boston, Columbus came from Colorado, Gerke came from California, Coryell's coming from Florida. Say, in the end, we were and will remain to the end like brothers, you know. And Jim Pepper was a visionary, a genius. For me, as I said, in the top 4 saxophone players of all time. His music will live forever. It was funny, brilliant, smart. He was really a genius at whatever he did. He was a great dancer. He was a tap dancer. He did the Native American dancing. He was a champion. They have competitions for that. He used to win that stuff. His grandfather, I think, used to lead some of the peyote chants in Oklahoma, where only Native peeps can go. And you're not supposed to record that stuff because it's for prayer, spiritual purpose, not for a commercial thing. But because Pepper was family to the grandfather, he was allowed to record some of these powwows. And from those chants, that's where he got those songs, Wichita-to and Yanaho, Wichita-to, Gimera, Oranika, Herane, Hene, Hene, Noa, Wichita. That came from his grandfather, from going to Oklahoma. Pepper had those kind of experiences. He used to go up to Alaska a lot and jump in these icy lakes with a knife between his feet and catch salmon by hand. I mean, you know, this is not the usual jazz musician stories, which most of these cats were urban. They never could think of going in an icy lake in Alaska. But Pepper had that part of him too, and he was beautiful. I mean, physically beautiful, and as I say, just charming, hilarious, and his native name is Flying Eagle, and that really says it all. That was his spirit. And that would be the best way to describe his sound. He had the most beautiful sound on the saxophone of anyone I ever heard. And one note was all I need to know. It's him, completely unique, original, and that's it. And all the great saxophone players that I know who knew him give it up to Jim Pepper. That includes Bert Wilson, who was a genius saxophone player who unfortunately just passed. He was supposed to be here. Dave Liebman. You ask any of these guys about Jim Pepper, they'll bow down to Jim Pepper. A lot of the new generation saxophone players don't know him. They're asleep on him. And I hope that, you know, they get hip to him, because it would be good for them to hear somebody just with that much soul in his sound and love in his sound. It wasn't a technical thing with him. He played naturally by ear. He didn't imitate anybody. He had his own way of making the changes. It was completely unique. And a genius, a brother, a good friend, and one of a kind. I guess that's all I can say in words, because words don't describe this cat. Okay, is that good?
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for asking me. You know, I'm honored to contribute.